today's tutorial, we're going to focus on creating underwater caustic patterns. But before we jump into that, I want to show you a couple of tweaks that we made to the shader since last week. So here's the shader that we've been working on, and the first thing that I did was increase the strength of the ripples just a little bit. I think they were at 0.2 or 0.3, and I've upped them to 0.7 here. The next thing that I did is tweak the colors of the water just a little bit. I felt like the colors were a little bit too dark and maybe they needed to be slightly little bit more green. So you can see the values that I've selected here for my water, and you can match yours if you'd like. And the last thing that I did is tweak the settings on the geometry waves. I think I made the waves a little bit more toned down. So there are those values if you'd like to take a look. Alright, so let's jump into caustics. The first thing that we're going to do is take a look at some reference footage that shows what these caustic patterns look like in real life. So in this video you can see that as we go underwater, the sun is shining through the surface of the water, and the ripples on the surface are bending the light and focusing the light in these really cool looking ripple patterns. So this is some footage that's from real life. It's not computer generated or anything, but we can see that there are these really cool caustic patterns projected on the ocean floor from the sun shining through the water. So this is the effect that we're going to try to go for today. I'll put the link to this YouTube video in my description so you can take a look at the channel where I got it from. Alright, so let's switch back to Unreal and take a look at what this looks like in our scene. So here's the water scene that we've created, and I've created this decal actor that we're using to project our caustics. And I just want to show you what it's going to look like. So this is what it looks like without it, and if I turn it on, now we have our caustics. And what we've created is the illusion that the sun is shining through our water surface and creating these complex caustic patterns on the rocks underneath the water. So if I turn it off again, you can see that it just adds that little bit more flair of realism to our scene. So in today's tutorial, we're going to take a look at how to create these. The caustic patterns are created with a decal in Unreal, and we're going to be creating a shader for the decal that's actually quite advanced. So if you've never worked with decals in Unreal before, you should go ahead and take a look at some intro to decal videos. I've listed some links in the description, so you should take a look at those videos first just to get familiar with what a decal is and how it works, and then come back and finish watching this video on how to create caustics with decals. The reason that we're using decals is we could add these caustic patterns to the shader of the rocks, but the problem with that is we need these caustic patterns to be projected on everything that's underneath the water. If the player jumps into the water, we want the caustics to be projected on the player. Anything that we put in this space, we want to receive these caustic patterns, and we don't want to keep adding caustic shaders to all of the materials of everything we place under the water. So we're using a decal, and the way that that works is if I zoom back out here a little bit, I can move this decal around and you'll see that it's just this box that's the shape of the area that's underwater. So here you can see again, there's this green box. And basically everything inside this green box is going to get the decal projected on it. You can see as I move it around, the top of the box represents the top of the water, and then the shape of the box represents the size of the water. So as I said, we're going to be building the shader to apply for this decal. So let's go ahead and jump right into the shader editor and get started. Alright, the first thing that we need to do when we're making a shader for a decal is to change some of the settings on the root node. I'm going to come over here to Material Settings, and I'm going to change the material domain from Surface to Deferred Decal. And that will set up the way that the shader is rendered so that it works correctly with a decal. The second thing that I'm going to change is the blend mode here. I'm going to change it from opaque to translucent. And finally, I'm going to set my shading model from default lit to unlit. Because our caustic pattern is basically projected light, we don't need to do any of the standard lighting calculations that you'd normally see. Oh, and one more thing. I'm going to set the decal blend mode to emissive. Now you notice when I change all of these settings, the only inputs that I have over here are emissive color, opacity, and world position offset. So I'm kind of limited in what I can do with my shader. But luckily, all I really need is the color and the opacity. And today we're just going to use this emissive color pin. The next thing that I want to talk about is the texture. So this is the Caustics texture that we're going to be using today. And I'm just going to double click on it. And let's switch over and take a look at this texture. So I downloaded a piece of software called Caustics Generator to create this texture. And I'll put a link in the description so you guys can take a look at that software. Basically, it just allows you to generate caustic patterns. It's pretty cool. I also created this chromatic aberration, or the way that the color kind of pulls itself apart. And I did that by just, in Photoshop, I moved the blue channel 1 pixel up and to the left, and I moved the red channel 1 pixel down and to the right. Now make sure you set up your texture to be tiling before you do that. I'm also sharing the TGA for this texture in the description, so if you want to just download this one, you're welcome to, or you can probably build a better one than I have if you'd like to give that a shot using the Caustics Generator software or whatever techniques that you'd like to use. All right, so let's just wire our Caustics texture directly into emissive color, and we'll save that, and then we'll switch over to our scene and apply that shader to our decal. Now, just so that we can see what's going on, I'm going to temporarily create a new decal and place it over here, and then once we're done, I'll put the decal back in the water. So I'm going to come up here to Window and choose Editor Modes, Mode Panels. And then under Visual Effects, I'm going to pick Deferred Decal, and I'm just going to drag that into our scene. And you can see that by default, there's kind of this ugly green-yellow texture applied, and we definitely don't want to keep that. So I'm going to come over here to the decal material and drop it down, and we're going to go ahead and select our water decal. All right, so now you can see that we have our Caustics texture projected. And wherever the decal intersects with geometry, that texture gets projected onto the geometry. Now, right now, it's kind of dim looking, and I want to increase the brightness a bit. So I'm going to come back over here to our shader, and I'm just going to add a multiply, and I'm going to brighten this up. So let's multiply this by a value of 3. And then we'll wire the result of this multiply into our emissive color and save it and take a look at the result. So now you can see that our result is a little bit brighter. Well, we need to do a little bit more here. And the next step that we're going to do is, instead of projecting our texture in decal space, we're going to project the texture in world space. So I'm going to switch back to my shader, and we need to add a world position node. And in order to make it the right size, we need to multiply it by a scalar value, a constant, and we're going to multiply this by a value of 0.01, just to make our caustic patterns the correct size. Now, the world position is an X, Y, and Z value, but our UV coordinates are just a float 2. So we need to know which part of the X, Y, and Z to use here. And what we want is the X and Y. So I'm going to add a mask, and we're going to set our component mask to R and G. So that's going to take the X and the Y components and leave out the Z. So this is basically a Z projection. And I'm going to wire that into the UVs of my texture sample, and we'll save it and switch over and see what we get from this. So now you can see that my caustics are projected in world space, and I've got the scale tuned a little bit to get the caustic patterns the right size. This is looking pretty good so far. I think the next thing that we're going to add is some animation to pan the caustic pattern. So let's switch back here. And we want to take our coordinates once we've created them. And we want to add a panner. And this is going to scroll our UVs so that we can animate our caustic pattern. And we want to take the results of the panner and let's scale this just a little bit. So I'm going to add a multiply. And I'm going to multiply this by a value of 0.6. So I'm going to add a new constant and scale by 0.6. For this demo, I'm going to use a speed value of 0.3 for X and 0.15 for Y. And again, we'll save that and take a look. And there we go, that helped. Now we have a caustics pattern that's panning. However, it doesn't really look like the caustics pattern that we are seeing in that reference video that we saw at the beginning. And the reason for that is it's panning uniformly. And what we actually want to do is to kind of warp this as it pans so that it will undulate and pan a little bit more chaotically and non-uniformly. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll switch back over to our shader. And what we want to do now is we want to add another texture sample. And this time we're going to sample a normal map. And we're going to use the normal map to warp our UV coordinates. So I'm just going to drop this down and I'm going to select this texture called water norm. Now this is another normal map that I've created. And if I double click here, you can see it looks like this. I'll also post a link to this texture down in the description if you want to download it. It's just another water ripples normal map. We're going to use this to deform our caustics. So just like we're doing with the UV coordinates for our texture sample, I'm going to use the same world space position for the coordinates of our normal map here. And I'm going to take these and I'm going to also use a panner here. And we need some speed values for this panner, so I'm going to give them a speed of 0.3 in the Y. And then with this set of texture coordinates, I'm going to multiply them to set the correct scale. And in this case, I'm going to multiply by a constant of 2 to get the right size for our normal map here. Now, if I were just to plug the results of this normal map in as they are, I would get a really, really massive amount of distortion. In fact, let's just go ahead and do that so you can see what it looks like. And then we'll adjust it from there. So I'm going to add another component mask because I just want the X and the Y, or the R and the G in this case. And then I'm going to add that together with the UV coordinates from here. And let's take a look and see what we get from this. It's going to be a little bit crazy. Yeah, we're getting so much distortion on this caustics map that you can barely even tell what it is. So what I need to do is, after sampling my normal map here, I need to tone it down quite a bit. So I'm going to add a multiplier right here. And then I'm going to multiply this value by a really small number. I'm going to multiply a constant, and this is going to be 0.015, just to really weaken this normal map before distorting my UV coordinates. Alright, and now you can see that I'm getting some cooler results. Instead of just panning uniformly, I'm tweaking my UV coordinates before using them to look up my caustics texture. I'm using that normal map to bend the UV coordinates, and I'm getting some really interesting results. This is kind of looking similar to what I was seeing in that initial reference video that we took a look at. I'm really liking where this is going. So let's keep it up. Now the next thing that I'd like to do is add in a second texture, because right now we just have one single texture that's panning, and even though it's distorted, it still looks a little bit too uniform to me. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this texture. and clone it down here. And then I'm going to move this multiply over, and I'm going to take the result of this and add it together with the result of my second texture. Now I need to create some UV coordinates for my second texture as well, just like I did for my first one. And so in order to do that, I'm just going to grab this panner and this multiply and copy them and bring them down here. Maybe I'll just clean this up a little bit while I'm at it, just to make it a little bit more consolidated. Alright, so my panner is going to be multiplied by 0.66. I'm going to make this one just slightly different size. And then just like I did with the distortion here, I'm going to copy this guy, and we're going to add this distortion down here as well. Now one last thing that I need to do, I need to not forget to, just like I did here with the panner speed, I need to add the correct panner speed for this guy here. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to negate the speed for Y so that this one scrolls in the opposite direction of the other one. And lastly, I'm going to start out with my world space position, just like I did with this one up here. I'm going to bring in the world space position for this one down here. Okay, so now I've got two textures that are both scrolling, and because I negated my Y here, they're scrolling in cross directions from each other. I'm going to go ahead and save this, and let's take a look at what we get. Alright, so now we've got something that looks pretty cool. We're scrolling two different textures, and we're combining them together to get our final resulting pattern. Now I could stop here if I wanted to, but I want to show you something that doesn't work very well. If I move my box over here so that it intersects the wall of my water area, you can see that I've got these stretch marks down the side. And the reason for that is right now I'm only projecting the texture in a single axis. I'm just projecting it in the Z axis, which is straight down. And what I actually want to do is project this in all three axes. I want to project it from left to right, from front to back, and from top to bottom so that I don't get that stretching. So let's go ahead and jump into doing that now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my world space position. I want to project it. So this is projecting it in Y. So for my description over here, I'm just going to label this Y. Then I'm going to clone this guy. And for projecting it in X, I need to select the green and the blue channels. And for projecting it in Z, oh, sorry, you know what? I've been wrong. This is not Y, this is Z here. So I'm going to just rename that. Yep, sorry about that mistake. And I'm going to move that down, and then for projecting it in Y, I need to select the red and the blue channels. Alright, so now I've got masks for my world space position for my three channels. Now I'm going to blend between the X and the Y using a linear interpolate node. I'm just going to back this up to give myself some more space. And then I'm going to blend between the result of that and my Z using a second linear interpolate node. Alright, so now you can see I'm blending between my X and Y, and then I'm blending between my Z, and I need something to be able to use for the alpha values of these. And the thing that determines which set of texture coordinates that I need to blend with is the normal of whatever the decal is applied to. So I need to somehow bring in the normal of my world. Now Unreal provides a really nice feature that allows me to do that. It's called a scene texture. And if I come over here to the settings, see how this says scene color? I can drop this down and select world normal. And what that's going to allow me to do is to bring in the normals of my whole world. And so wherever the direction that my rocks are facing, or the panel that the decal is applied to, I'll get the normal from this node. And that's pretty cool because it means I can get whatever direction my scene is facing and bring that into my scene. Now I want to take the absolute value of that normal, and now I want to round it. Because I'm creating masks, I just want to round it between 0 and 1. I want to know, am I facing in this direction or not? So I'll take my absolute value and round it. And now what I get is, this has 3 different values, and they're an answer to a yes or no question. Am I facing X, am I facing Y, or am I facing Z? So here I'm going to use another component mask, and I'll take just the green. So this is answering the question, am I facing Y? And I'll wire that in here. And then I'll take just the blue channel, or just the Z, and I am going to wire that in here. So now I'm blending between these 3 sets of UV coordinates for top, sides, and front. And I can use that as my UV coordinates here, and here, and here. And this is great because what it means is I can project my caustic pattern from the top, from the sides, and from the front and back, and I'll be able to project these on all 3 axes in my world. Now there is one more thing that I want to do. I want to add another constant, and this is going to be kind of a global size for me. And so I'm going to come over here to this size where I've got my 2 value. I'm going to add another multiply here. So I'm going to multiply this by my global size. And I'm going to multiply this by my global size. And finally, I'm going to multiply this by my global size. So I have 3 different scale values that I can control. I can control one set of caustics with this scale value, and the other set of caustics with this scale value, and my distortion normal with this scale value. But I can control all of them with this other scale value over here. And I'm just going to set this to a value of 0.5, and that'll give me my final scale for the whole project. And what I get as a result is a broken shader. So if I come back over here, you can see that I forgot to plug in my absolute world position here and here. So I just need to do that and then recompile the shader. Alright, here you can see my final result. And if I move my decal box over so that it intersects the wall now, you can see that it's projecting correctly from the side and also from the front. So this decal is going to project top, side, and front and be just the same. So let's come over here to our water and we'll take a look. Now the decal that's in the water is using the same shader that I just built. So if we take a look at what it looks like under the water, you can see that that decal is now projecting correctly on the top, front, and side of all of our rocks. So super cool. And I really love what this effect does. If I turn it on and off again, you can see that it really adds a nice sense of realism to our scene to be able to see those animated caustic patterns underneath the water. Alright, I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial video. If you did, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Also, coming up next week, I'm going to create another tutorial video for water, and we're going to be looking at creating foam on the surface of the water. So be sure to come back next week and take a look at that. If you have any questions about today's tutorial, be sure to post those in the comments, and I'll try to answer as best I can. And I'll see you next week, everybody.